I'm Alan Lehto from Riverton, Wyoming. I was in the Navy from 1967 to 71, and I originally picked up my ship in Da Nang Harbor and was on deck force. Didn't particularly care for that, so after a few months, the first opening that came open was signalman. So I studied flashing lights and flags and semaphore, and when the signalman that rotated off was gone, I put in for it, and they asked the other signalman, and they said, well, he's been studying really hard, so I think he'd make a good one. So I became a signalman. Ended up as signalman second class. I was on an LST, which stands for Landing Ship Tank, although we patrolled the rivers in Vietnam, and when we would be up a river, we said that the LST stood for a large slow target, because we did not travel very fast. 12 knots was top speed. And this particular ship was commissioned in 1941 for the D-Day landings, and they were built for one trip. They were expendable. And I got on it in 1968, and we always wondered how long it was going to stay together. But I would have to say probably one of my most memorable events in my time there. We carried supplies and food, ammunition, mostly beer. They said it had formaldehyde in it to keep it good, but we didn't get any on the ship, but we hauled a lot of it. But anyway, we did most of our trips from Da Nang to a place called Qua Viet, which was right by the DMZ. And I didn't realize till looking at the map upstairs how close we were to North Vietnam. It was right next door, so it was pretty close. And we had one event when we actually raced another LST from Da Nang to Qua Viet, and we actually beat them by about an hour. Our captain was a nice guy, and he said, well, we'll just steam around out here outside the mouth of the river and let them go in first. So we did. So the other ship, the other LST, went in there and docked up on the landing at Qua Viet, which was probably about 3 or 4 football fields big, and it was all cement. And the bad thing about this was the standard operating procedure was when an LST came in and beached, the supplies that went to the land bases was supposed to be loaded up and taken immediately. The supplies that went to the smaller river boats, we loaded them with forklifts and our crane over the side directly onto these little boats, and they were supposed to be gone right after that. This occasion there was 3 LSTs came in there, offloaded supplies, ammunition, and they were still there. And, and the VC dropped in mortars from across the river, and they hit that ammo dump. And so we sent our papa boats, which was the smaller craft that we carried, sort of like light boats. We would go there day and night for 3 days to fight fires, secondary ammunition going off. And it was quite the spectacular deal, because there was a lot of ammunition stored right there. And I remember in particular, they had some of the ammunition had what they called flechettes, and they were very small, hardened darts that were in some of the ammunition. And every time we would come back, when I was on the Papa boat for my duty, every time I'd come back, you would pick these out of the wooden sides of this boat. So I have several of those in my footlocker at home. So sometimes it was pretty close. So that was quite the experience.
Yeah, those flechette rounds, those things are nasty. I've seen those before.
Very nasty.
Yeah. So did you, were you drafted or did you join?
Actually, I was going to Casper College, and I had quit college and decided I was going to work. So I worked in the Gas Hills, but my number was coming up real soon on the draft. So I thought I better do something. So I joined the Navy, and I went down to Denver, and I was sworn in, and then came back and awaiting the date that I would go to boot camp in San Diego. And I got an Uncle Sam draft notice that says, "You are drafted in the Army." So I took the letter to my recruiter. I said, "Can you take care of this, or what do I need to do?" And he did, so I ended up in the Navy, but that was 2 weeks after I had been sworn in the Navy, so it was really close.
Yeah, information didn't get there that fast back then, so.
Luckily, I've always thought that was kind of a blessing, because I don't know that I would have cared to be in the jungle all of the time, but I did end up on an LST, which is a flat bottom boat running up and down the rivers, and I have talked to a lot of Army guys and Marine guys because we supplied their camps up the rivers, and told them that I was on an LST, and a lot of them said, "Oh, you guys might have had it worse than we did."
Oh, yeah.
Because when things happened around us, there was a possibility that we could go somewhere else or dig a foxhole and have protection. But you guys out in the middle of the river, where are you going to go? You didn't. You stayed right there and hoped for the best.
Yep.
And it worked out.
So what I guess, what did you do when you got home right out of the Army? Did you go right back into the workforce, or I mean, what was your experience after you got home, I guess?
Well, I didn't get out of the Army. I got out of the Navy. But
excuse me, I apologize. Out of the Navy. I apologize.
But I had gone to my second ship after I was in Vietnam in 68, 69, and part of 71. And so then I got on an LPD that was home ported out of San Diego, and we made some tours there. In fact, that's when I got back to Vietnam, but it was a very nice experience that time, because we had a class of midshipmen that had to take a cruise before they actually became officers. They called it their midi cruise. So we picked up the midshipmen in San Diego, and we went to Hawaii, and we went to Sydney, Australia, and we went to Auckland, New Zealand, Bangkok, Thailand, Japan, China, and eventually we had to go to Vietnam because the new officers needed to get their combat ribbon and get combat pay. So that's when I went back, but with a bunch of officers on board, new to become officers. We didn't get very close, but it was fine with me. And then when we finally got back, that's when I got out. But I know that a lot of people have talked about how the Vietnam veterans were treated, and I can attest to that somewhat, because when I got back to San Diego and we docked, we were about a quarter of a mile from the gates where you left the base. And so the morning that I got out, I walked down that quarter mile with my duffel bag over my shoulder, and as soon as I walked through those gates, the spitting at you and the garbage thrown at you and the name calling began as soon as you walked out that gate. Luckily, I didn't get hit. There was also rocks and stuff thrown at us too, but I know a lot of the veterans actually did get this to happen to them, and they were struck or spit upon and all of that. And I thought since then, it was such a blow to all of us, and I thought this really surprised me because I had served my country. I thought I had served my country, and I was proud to have served my country. And then when I got home, I found out my country hated me. And it just floored me the way some of the veterans were treated. I have a friend that I talked to a while back, and I've talked to him a lot of times, but I read a little bit of history of his experiences, and he lost 18 jobs shortly after he got out of the Marine Corps, as soon as the employers found out that he was a Vietnam warrior. He was terminated just because he was a Vietnam vet, and it was just amazing. So this gathering that we have here at this Wyoming Welcome Home Vietnam Vet is just the most wonderful thing that I can say I've experienced in a very long time. It's 50 years later, and somebody said thank you and welcome home. So this has been amazing. I thank you guys what you're doing too.
Thank you for sharing your story with us. I mean,
I have a quick question. Alan, can you describe your living conditions aboard both of the ships that you were on? What was it like?
An LST, as I said, it was built for the invasion of Normandy and all of the D-Day invasions and stuff. So they were very, very Spartan. Ours had been upfitted a little bit, but in the berthing compartments, most of the beds were canvas cots that hung on chains. In a series, there would be 3 or 4 of them tied together with chains, and you would fold them up to make more room to pass through there, and then you folded them down, and so you were stacked up. We did have a few, they were aluminum box-like affairs, and after you had some time on there, you could get one of those when somebody left, and you said, I got that, I got seniority. And they actually had a mattress on them. They folded up also, but they were a box about 8 or 10 inches deep, and the lid would open so you could keep your clothing or whatever in there instead of these little bitty lockers. It was several years ago that we had a ship's reunion in Indianapolis, and there were some Greek sailors that bought an old LST, Americans that bought an LST from some Greeks, and they brought it over here. It's in Evansville, Indiana. On our ship's reunion, we had a tour, and we went there, and the wives went with us. And we didn't get to go completely through all of the compartments, but we got to go part way into some of the berthing compartments, and it just made all of us guys that were on the Litchfield really got a tickle out of when the wives were looking in there, and they said, I would never live in a place like this. But we didn't have a lot of choice.
yeah.
And the mess decks was not much bigger than this room right here, and that served the whole ship. an LST had the complement was 103 sailors and 7 officers, I believe, but we never had a full complement. So there were extra beds here and there, I suppose, but when we had our ship's reunions, the guys that set it up, they actually invited 2 other LSTs that we also traveled with from Da Nang to Qua Viet and some of the other rivers, because they weren't sure out of the small complement of an LST you would have enough guys to make a reunion. And so we've done 3 of them now, and we usually end up right around 100 guys total from the 3 different ships and a number of officers, and so that's really been something, because that just started about 6 years ago. For the last 40 years or so, being in Wyoming especially, you don't have a lot of Navy, so I didn't have a clue where anybody was, what was happening, and then I get a notice that said we're going to have a ship's reunion. So that was great. That was great to get with guys just like you have guys right here that you haven't seen forever, and some of these guys have never seen before, but to get together with your shipmates it's just actually overwhelming a little bit. So that's been really enjoyable. We have one scheduled in March of next year, again in San Diego, so that's going to be really interesting.
Awesome.
And that'll be the 50 year for them as well, just like this is the 50 year. So, but it was quite the experience.
Definitely.
Would never give it up,
No.
ever. I don't want to do it again, but I would never,
It's one of those once in a lifetime.
never give up. Like I said before, and I had done an interview once before with the gal in Riverton, the radio, and it was right after I walked out of her just impromptu interview. That's when I thought I should have said what I said a little while ago, that I was so proud to have served my country, and then when I got home I found out my country hated me. That was just amazing.
Yeah.
One other question I have, Cody. How did you communicate with people back home when you were on a ship? Or could you?
Well, that's
Excellent
very
question, yeah.
interesting, because
How did the mail work?
I've had a son and a son-in-law in Desert Storm in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and communication with them is almost immediate. They can call home and all of this. I was not married or anything, so basically I communicated with my parents, and it was by letter most of the time, and that usually took 3 to 5 months for a letter to get to us. And then I came up with an idea. I bought a little cassette tape recorder, and so I would just talk on the tape, and I would tell them how things were going, what we were doing. Couldn't tell them where we were, but you would tell them about your daily life and how's everybody at home and all of that. And so then I would send this tape home. And again, 3 or 4 weeks or months later, you would get a tape back, and so then I would get to hear my parents and brother and sisters and stuff talking, and it just took forever, because especially if you were at sea somewhere, it was a little difficult for the mail service to find you.
Right.
But every once in a while we would have a helicopter come in, and they would drop off a bag of mail, and mail call was a very big deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
I always remember when we would get care packages from time to time, and the first, when people didn't really know how to pack stuff, they would just put it in a cardboard box, and if it was cookies or something, there were cookie crumbs in there, and that was about it. So they figured out the best thing to do was put stuff in boxes or in the larger coffee cans and put whatever it was in there and pack it in popcorn. And so you get your mail, and here is cookies or candy or whatever that's 3 or 4 months old, packed in popcorn that's 3 or 4 months old, but it was all excellent.
Oh,
We'd
yeah.
eat every bit of
It
it.
doesn't matter.
Yeah, it was popcorn from the world. This was called it the world or the land of the round eye.
Yeah.
Do you still have any of those cassette tapes?
I don't believe I do. I'd have to look in my foot locker. I don't think I have any of those tapes, but
If you see one, Alan, will you call me?
that
Because
would
we'll incorporate that into what we're doing.
be interesting to
great.
listen and
Definitely.
see
Yeah,
what
that
we
would
were
be-
talking about at the time.
So
That'd be wonderful.
I guess one question that popped into my mind: what was like one of your biggest morale boosters? Because I know for me when I was in Afghanistan, it was little things from home. My mom would send me I guess buffalo chicken and cracker type thing, or some homemade venison jerky, and that was, the one thing that would get me through to the next month. What was yours?
Well, just almost anything that came from stateside was a treat for everyone, and of course, being a small crew and a tight-knit crew, everybody shared everything. So you got to have stuff from Wyoming. We probably had jerky and stuff. I can't remember exactly, but probably had jerky, and you would get stuff from people down in the south, and you'd have whatever kind of treats they liked, and so you got a real variety. When mail call happened, everybody had good stuff.
Yeah.
So sure beat the chow on the board.
Definitely. Beat the sea ration.
Yes.
Yeah.
Although we did have cooks in the kitchen and all of that. So, in fact, one time we brought out the first bunch of Marines that came out of Vietnam, and we took them to Okinawa. Well, they had a big old trailer full of sea rations, and it was on our main deck along with their other motorized equipment and all that, tied down on the main deck. And so the closer we got to Okinawa and visiting with them, and I was a signalman, so I was on the highest part of the ship, and everybody wanted to get up there and see as far as they could see. So we would have a lot of the Marines and the Marine officers come up there, so we got to be friends with them. Well, their CO, I don't remember what rank he was, probably a lieutenant or something like that. I asked him one day, I said, "What are you going to do with all those sea rations that are in that trailer down there?" He said, "I do not care what happens to those sea rations at all." He said, "I never want to see them again." So the signalmen got together and we put ourselves a little work party. And we went down there and hauled just as many of those sea ration boxes as we could up to the signal bridge and put them in our flag bags, which are the operational, they're pretty good sized boxes. And the flags just hang in them off of cables that run up to the mast. So we filled up the flag bags with sea rations, and when we dropped those guys off at Okinawa, they didn't care what had happened to them. And so for the next 3 or 4 months, when we had mid-rats, which is the midnight to 4 watch, and the rest of the ship had to go down to the mess decks and get whatever the cooks slopped together, and we would have our sea rations, and the conning officer that actually was on watch, and he directs where the ship is going, tells the wheelhouse where to go. He would wander back there about midnight and he'd say, "Well guys, what are we having for mid-rats tonight?" So we would say, "Well, you have your choice of beanie weenies or whatever it was, macaroni and cheese or whatever." And they always had chocolate bars, and they had these little bitty 2 or 3 pack cigarettes. And so all of that was good at that time.
Oh yeah.
But sea rations at midnight for us sailors was a really good deal.
Yeah, yeah. That was some of my favorite time on guard too. You get away with eating all sorts of MREs. So.
Exactly. Uh-huh. Yeah, it was quite the life.
Yeah, definitely an experience.
I'm certainly glad I'm back here and made it, because there's 58,267, I think, that did not, and they are on the wall, which I got to see 2 years ago, I believe. We had a ship's reunion in Charleston, South Carolina. My wife said, well, we're only 500 miles from Washington, D.C. This would be the best opportunity. So we went there. We only got to go there for 2 days. But what an awesome experience to see the wall, to see the Korean War vet, the World War II memorial, and of course the Lincoln Memorial and all of the other Washington, D.C. things. But my, what an experience that was, the wall. I made it down about half of it before. That was the end of it for me.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely be an emotional experience.
It is very. I was fine until we got about halfway down the wall, and there was a little vase with a few flowers in it, and there was a picture of a young man with a little boy and a lady at the base of the wall. And when I saw that, I wasn't sure if the little boy was the Vietnam casualty, and this might have been his mom and dad, or if the mom or dad was the casualty and this was just a picture of the family. But as soon as I got to that, it was all over. I really couldn't see much of the wall after that.
Yeah, I imagine not.
As I said, I'm really happy to be one of the ones that's here, and I'm so happy that Wyoming and whomever else had something to do with putting this together. It's so greatly appreciated. It's beyond words.
Well, I'm glad that it's very well received. That's awesome. So,
Yeah.
I wasn't around during that time, so, but it definitely show appreciation to the older vets. I mean, I couldn't have done what I did without you guys, so you definitely paved the way for me.
Yeah. Well, one more thing I would like to add, because I felt so guilty about this for so long, because as I said, my son was in the Marines and my son-in-law was in the Marines, and I mean, he was in the Army. But anyway, they served over in Desert Storm, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And because of the way that the Vietnam veterans were treated, you never saw them for 40 years or so. You never saw someone walking around with a Vietnam vet vest, hat, anything. You just didn't know of anyone that was a Vietnam vet unless you got to talking, and it made me feel so guilty, and I stated it several times, that with these recent wars that we had to lose 2,000 to 3,000 of our young guys, probably around your age, before the American public started saying, oh, there were some Vietnam guys that did a lot of stuff too. Maybe we should say thank you to them. And that's when that started, when you started to see some of the Vietnam hats and veterans wearing something that says I was a Vietnam veteran. But we had to lose 2,000 or 3,000 of our young people before the American public recognized that we did what we did because we were told to, mostly. But very proud to have done it.
Yeah.
So
Definitely.
Thank you so much, Alan.
Yeah.
yes,
we appreciate
thank
it,
you.
Alan.